you're hearing me through your headphones? Oh, the only problem with that is you won't be able to hear if someone else. I'll relay the questions to you. If Jamie's answers, yeah. All right. I see we're streaming live on YouTube. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go ahead and call this September 1st budget workshop to order. Thank you to everybody who's able to join us here tonight live in City Hall. Thank you to everybody who is streaming in through Zoom and watching us on YouTube. It's good to have you with us. We have one item on tonight's agenda. It is a wrap-up overview of the fiscal year 2020-21 budget review. We still have to wrap up our conversation from the previous budget workshop, our previous project workshop, where we discussed many capital outlay projects that the City Commission has been talking about for a few years now. So what I would like to propose is that we sort of play tonight by ear. We let the manager go ahead and present the balanced budget that staff has come up with. And then I believe we'll come back and check the time. Thank you. If we are able to get through our budget review in a timely manner, and we still have time tonight to talk about those capital outlay projects, we'll discuss that. If not, then we may need to come back for another budget workshop before we finalize this year. I also need to add one item to the agenda, which is appointing a new representative for the North Central Florida Regional Planning Council. That was held by Commissioner Hersum's seat. So by tradition, Commissioner Clark, you would take the first year there. That's an appointment. That's hardly an action. It's like half an action. All right. Well, we'll discuss it tonight, and we'll discuss how traditionally that would be Commissioner Clark. And then I'll talk to Commissioner Clark about what that entails. And then we'll come back at the first meeting, and we'll take the full action. All right. Don't listen to him. It's a wonderful opportunity. Okay. So with that, everyone understands what we're going to try to accomplish tonight. And we may have the need to come back one more time. It just depends on how our conversation on the budget review goes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask the manager to start us off and review the 5, 6, 7 workshops we've had so far this summer. Take us through all of those very slowly. Oh, I'm sorry. You got me confused there. I'm blaming you, Commissioner Coleman. I'll take a motion to approve the agenda as it has been published. I have a motion from Commissioner Clark, a second from Commissioner Coleman. Any changes or additions to the motion or to the agenda as it has been published? I hear nothing from the dais. Dallas, if you would put our phone number up, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we're still doing a hybrid version of live meeting and Zoom meeting at the same time, which means that our folks that are watching on YouTube are about 30 seconds behind us. So to make sure that they have the opportunity to address the commission, we're going to make sure that we give them that 30-second delay to catch up with us. So ladies and gentlemen, we have a motion to approve the agenda. It has been properly seconded. So if you want to call in and address the commission on that motion, you may do so by dialing the phone number that's on your screen. Once we get you into the meeting, you'll see a little symbol at the bottom of your screen with a hand on it. Click that hand symbol. That'll let us know that you want to address the commission. We'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. Dallas, do we have anybody in the waiting room?
We have nobody with their hand raised, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And Travis is asking us if our TV volume is down. Is that, you got it corrected?
That was from earlier.
Okay. All right, coming back to the commission for a roll call vote. Commissioner Coleman?
Aye.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Aye.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Martin?
Aye.
Commissioner Norfleet?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And now, Mr. Manager, take us through the 2021 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you indicated, this is our 5th budget workshop. It's a wrap up, but we just, in case the city commission just really wants to dig in a little bit deeper, if we don't get far enough tonight, we always have a week before our first public hearing. So we could do it again next week and have a 6th workshop or 7th if the commission so desires. Tonight, there are lots of handouts for the commission. First is just a copy of this presentation. We also have our fully put together CIP. We've handed this out at every workshop, but typically it's either general fund or enterprise fund. Tonight it's all rolled up, and I believe that is a 6-page document. So you can see that's a 5-year look, but what you should see is the things in year 1, fiscal year 2021. Those are going to show up somewhere in our budget, either in the general fund or the enterprise funds. Mr. Mayor, in addition, we have a worksheet for wild spaces, public places, somewhere in there, which is also loaded up. Let me see where the wild spaces, public places worksheet is.
While you're looking for that, Commissioner Clark. Tell us what you've got and we'll figure out what you're missing, because I think I'm missing one too.
The presentation? The CIP. All right. Amy may be still working on those, but. Okay. All right, we need CIP and wild spaces, guys. Okay, so the wild spaces is embedded in the CIP, but if we give it to you separately, you can look specifically at the recreation projects that are in there. It's a little quicker view. No, that is not correct. We're going to jump into the presentation. We have merged our presentations from previous workshops and then pulled out extraneous, non-essential stuff. I will move through with some pace and request that if the commission has a question, they raise their hand and we'll slow down. Otherwise, we should be able to go through this fairly quickly.
On that point, let's hold this a little more informally tonight. And because we have these audio issues, if you need to jump in and no one's talking, just jump right to it and engage with the manager or staff for as long as you need to, and then we'll come back.
All right. And if Dallas is sitting back down, advance the slide, please, Dallas. All right. So we've seen this. This is our budget timeline and process. You guys know we're getting here to the end, and that our first budget hearing is going to be 2 weeks from yesterday, September the 14th. And our second one will be September 28th, just in time for our new budget year on October 1st. Next slide. So commission considerations, we start each presentation. These are the big categories which the commission gives us direction. Next slide. Long-term, the commission asked us early on in this budget season to talk about some big-term, long-term projects. These were the list of those projects that we looked at, and we covered that in our capital projects workshop some weeks ago. So we'll jump into the governmental funds, which are primarily the general fund and just a few others that are more extraneous. This is, the city has, the budget that is presented to you is balanced. Primarily, it is based on a 5.999 millage rate, and it includes, it's a continuation budget. And at the last workshop, we told you that we had presented a ballot budget, but we did not fund contingency. And the commission expressed some disappointment in that and said, if we do that, that should be a one-year thing, not a going forward thing. After that workshop, we looked to see where there might be opportunities to provide additional funding. and the state heard our prayers and revised our budget, our revenues. And so we got revenue increases from the state and from where else, Dallas? Okay, so we got some savings in health insurance, we got some increased revenues from the state, and now we have fully funded contingency. And I think there is about a $13,000 surplus of revenues over expenses right now that will either roll into fund balance, or the commission could assign to a project or initiative if they wish. Next slide, please. So remind the commission that we adopted a preliminary millage rate of 6.45, but our budget is based on 5.99. I would just take a second to advise the commission that if we want to move forward on any of these bigger capital projects, that the commission, even though we have a balanced budget at 5.99, may propose to adopt a budget at something higher than 5.99 and take those revenues and apply them towards these special projects that they've asked us to look at. If we take out a loan, our first loan payment wouldn't be due for next year. So it's not to begin debt service on a loan. It's just to help us get out the gate. There'll be planning and administrative costs associated with that. And so the commission may say we want to apply 1/10 of a mil, 1/4 of a mil, anything up to 6.405. Your discretion, staff's not recommending it. It is just reminding the commission that it has that ability to do that. Next slide, please. Issues associated with personnel. You can see the strike through there under health insurance increases. I told you last time, kind of bragged, that we did a fantastic job of negotiating a health increase at 6.88. And when Dallas dug into that, they actually got it down to 4.59%. So excellent year for us on health insurance increases. We've also proposed a up to 2.5% merit increase, which was below our peers. The county, city of Gainesville, city of Alachua are all proposing up to 3% merit increases. And so this is an area that we want to do as much as we can, but to get a balanced budget, we felt like 2.5 was the most that we could propose. Each 1% of merit increase will cost the general fund about $15,000. And we propose no COLA increase. That's kind of been of a position that the commission has taken for several years now. A couple new positions in here. We've covered those in our budget workshops. Next slide, please. Yes, sir.
If we're talking about on that last slide, if we're going to do this budget.
Okay.
What I was saying is, and we had talked, if we're running through the budget and we see like this particular side with the COLA and the merit, do we need to discuss this now? Is that what we need to do? Okay. And then, so on the comment for mine, as we discussed, the 2.5 merit raise, and that is across the board from the bottom employee to the top. Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. What we propose is that each employee can get up to 2.5% increase based on their scores from their performance evaluation. So a bare minimum evaluation would likely result in the bare minimum raise. An outstanding employee with an excellent evaluation would score the full 2.5%.
Mr. Manager, there, what will be the minimum?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, if you score a 3 or a 3.1 or better, you usually get whatever the bottom of our pay scale adjustment was, which this year I think is 1.2%. Anything below meet standards is a 0% pay increase. So if you score a poor performance evaluation, you get no merit increase. Yes, sir.
3.1 is 1.2%.
Generally, yeah. Yeah, it scales based on whatever the merit raise the commission has approved that year. This one.
That's all right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Next slide, please, Dallas. Within the operations areas I'd mentioned, we've proposing a continuation budget, no new levels of service. We've also proposed no decreases in level of service, and we funded contingency at $50,000, which is consistent with what we've done in previous years. This is the very much rolled up budget for the general fund. It shows what we currently have revenues over expenditures of $15,000, total revenues of $7.4 million, total of expenses of just about the same. Again, a surplus of $15,000.
Mike,
Yes.
can we get I've got the commission on the screen. Can we make sure that the folks at home are seeing the slides? Are they? Okay, normally my screen mirrors the YouTube screen or what folks at home are watching. So I just want to make sure that everybody watching us can see the slides.
Well done, Mr. Mayor. So from this roll-up budget, we'll move into departmental budgets. I'd remind the commission, we have 27 different call centers. And so we'll try to move through these fairly quickly. We're usually looking at 3 to 4 call centers per slide. So these are legislative and executive. You can see that generally they're flat. If you see any increases, it's because we are increasing funding for a part-time staff assistant to a full-time position in the city clerk's area. And if you'd back up, I just want to point out that in our proposed budget, the commission is taking a hit as well. We funded you guys at $4,100 less than you had in our current fiscal year. So you are feeling the pain with us. All right, this is finance and administration, which reports to Dallas. So he's oversees finance, human resources, and non-departmental. This is where you will see the expense associated with the half-year-long purchasing warehouse specialist. Again, we're pointing out that we've fully funded $50,000 for contingency, and we saw a pretty dramatic reduction in non-departmental because we paid off an interfund loan that we have previously paid in years past. This is the Planning and Economic Development Department. This is Brian Thomas's responsibility area. Everybody's looking at my chin. And again, in these areas, we're mostly level, slightly down, and economic development is significantly down, but that's because last year's budget carried the $50,000 incentive program that will not be a new expense for the city. We are rolling that forward, so we'll still have $50,000 to spend, but it's not showing up as a new expense for us. This department is also getting the benefit of a part-time administrative support position. That's in addition. Recreational programs are down. We're seeing, due to COVID, we're seeing less involved. There's very limited capital. We tried to spread our capital out so that every department gets something, but it's a significantly scaled back from recent years. So their capital is going to include just a renewal and replacement program that the commission directed us to undertake 5 years ago. And the reduction in revenues is really based on fall sports registration. It's actual is what we've already seen in terms of people that are not participating this year. Public Works, these are responsibility areas that report to Jamie. I guess these are about half of them. He has just as many on the utility side. But facilities and grounds, parks, streets and roads, we have increased funding in there. We're maintaining increased funding for Lime Rock and streets and roads. Any other, and the big capital programs are Southwest 4th Avenue sidewalk construction project that we're proposing as a 50-50 cost share with Miranda Homes. We've talked about that for a number of years, and renewal and replacement of equipment, which is primarily mowing equipment. Fire department, we propose to purchase NDCs, which are the computer systems they use in their their fire trucks, their apparatus. Bunker gears, a replacement program that the commission authorized some years ago. And we're looking for a SCBA tank refill system, which has been on our want list, our needs list for 5 or 6 years, and it never made it. This year we got it in there, and we're going to be able to fund it. These are special revenue funds. Champions Park, as you know, we received $25,000 in revenues from the contractor at Champions Park, and we spend it all trying to replace rotten plywood and rotten timber. So we will take in $25,000 and we will expend $25,000. The Wild Spaces fund, just below that, we're expecting revenues of $350,000. We have slotted expenses of $223,000. And you can see now we've added this line. The money that we borrowed from Wild Spaces, or actually from the city coffers to purchase the Canterbury or to go towards the Canterbury acquisition, we're going to pay it back over the rest of the Wild Spaces term at a rate of $80,000 each year. So we'll keep that in all of our budgets so the commission can see how we stand on that. And Mr. Mayor, that concludes the governmental funds, and it would be a good time for the commission or the public to ask questions or make comments.
Okay, let's start with the dais. Any questions from the commissioners? Comments, Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Manager, I was just, this first I had seen it and no big, is that PT position up at the little red schoolhouse? Is that up with Brian? The part-time position? Is that coming back to up where the building planning is zoning? Is they're so busy?
Mr. Mayor, that's a great question because I probably should have expanded upon that. We covered it some when we talked about taking a part-timer in the city clerk's area to full-time. That employee is going to full-time. That employee will then split their time. They're going to be 50% of their time with the city clerk. The other 50% of their time will be in planning and building. So that's digging into the real details of what we plan to do with that position, but excellent question.
And if I could just expound on that just a little bit, make sure we're on the same page. The idea is that that employee will generally split. The employee goes under the clerk in election times, right? Maybe full time in the clerk's office, other times. So there's going to be some intergovernmental cooperation when it comes to that one. And I want to extend my gratitude to both the manager and the clerk for recognizing that we have a need, and we have a need for a little bit of flexibility. So thank you both for working that out. I'm sorry, we're still in questions. Other commissioner questions or comments? Okay, seeing none from the dais. Dallas, if we put our phone number back up. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to a first stopping place in tonight's presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, if you're watching at home and following along, now all you need to do is dial that phone number on your screen. That'll get you into the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, you'll see a little symbol of a hand at the bottom of your screen. Click that symbol, and that'll let us know that you'd like to address the commission. You have a question on some of these budgetary items, we'll make sure you get the opportunity. Dallas, do we have anyone with their hand raised?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll go back to the commission, and Mr. Manager, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We'll jump into proprietary funds. We'll start with the electric utility. And this is our rolled up budget for the electric utility. You can see there's a decrease from 4.4 million to 4.44 million to 4.4 million. That's mostly associated with a anticipated reduction in wholesale power costs. Our customers will realize that as about a $2.50 a month reduction for each electric utility customer. Mr. Mayor, as we discussed in our previous workshop, we are proposing what's going to amount to about a 1% increase in utility monthly customer charges for each of our customer classes. I guess it's $1 for residential, and then it's on a sliding scale, $1.50 for non-residential single phase and non-demand meters, and $20 increase for our demand customers. But for each class, that amounts to about a 1% increase. Also indicated to the commission that we anticipate a 3.5% decrease on wholesale power costs. So the net impact to customers should be a reduction of about 2.5% per month. Also, just a slide to show over a 10-year period, a significant reduction in power costs for our customers on their monthly bills. The average Newberry customer is paying in May of 2020 about 20% less than they were paying in May of 2011. Mr. Mayor, next is water utility. And staff proposes, again, a balanced budget, but we propose an increase that will have an average impact to ratepayers of about 1% annually. If you want to advance that slide, Dallas. It's actually a 1.79% increase, which is in keeping with the Public Service Commission's published price index for water and wastewater utilities. Some 4 years ago, the commission gave us direction to monitor that price index and propose it so that we didn't let our utility rates get too far away from us. This commission was charged with making a pretty significant rate adjustment some 5 years ago, and they asked staff to propose those modest, minor rate increases on an annual basis rather than having to do some 10 or 15% increase moving forward. The cost, the average impact for a 1.79% increase in our water rates is going to be approximately 25 cents per month. And just to remind the commission that with the proposed increase, we will have the lowest water rates in our peer group. Mr. Mayor, on the wastewater utility, we looked at the same 1.79% increase and recognized that we don't think that that needs to be recommended this year. So we were proposing no rate increase on the wastewater side. We feel like that we have sufficient revenues generated. And so we propose a 0% increase in wastewater rates. If you look at how we stack up to our peers, we are also the lowest wastewater service cost in our peer group. That includes Alachua, Gainesville, High Springs, and Trenton. Mr. Mayor, just looking at some other funds that are within the enterprise funds, there's mosquito control. This only applies to certain customers that were in our mosquito control district. Each one of those households would pay $12 per year to fund our mosquito control, and our expenses generally match our revenues. It's about a $28,000 a year fund. We propose no change in that rate. Mr. Mayor, this is internal service fund for customer service. The revenues from this actually come from water, wastewater, and electric utilities. There's a line item in their budgets of expense. It comes in and funds our customer service group. That's Dallas's team that worked here at City Hall. There's also within our internal service fund utility administration, which is Jamie and his team down at our public works compound. This is their annual budget. So just to roll up across all funds, both governmental and enterprise funds, this is the average impact for residential customers. We propose no increase in fire assessment. We propose that our customers will see a $2.25 decrease in utility rates, millage rate of 5.99 with an increase in the appraised value of homes. The average customer will see about a $16 increase. So the net impact of the city will be just a hair over $13 for each property. Just some further detail there. Our customers expect to see a savings from Alachua County this year. So the net to total taxes to residents within new areas. They should realize close to a $25 a year saving for city and county services this year. Back to our summary slide of the high-level points that the commission gives us direction and feedback on. I think that as we've gone through our four previous workshops, we've discussed each of these in depth, but we'll be happy to field questions from the commission at this stage on any of these items.
Okay, Dice, commissioners, have any questions on those considerations? Anyone want to talk about? Well, you just took the screen away from me, Dallas. Now I have to find it on a slide. Debt service, long-term considerations. I'm almost there. There it is. Personnel expenses. That's fine. I got it now. I got it. Any questions from the dice? Okay. See, now I'm gonna move on to the end of this presentation. We'll go back to the public to see if they have anything. Are we moving into the urban revitalization proposal? Okay, well then actually let me stop then and just make sure that we are, if there's anything anyone wants to talk about with the budget that's in front of us, because once if no one has any objections, no one has any comments, no one has any further considerations that we should discuss right here, then we're going to assume that this budget is going to pass on both readings, because we have a real problem if we get to October and we don't have a balanced budget that has gone through 2 votes. So after this conversation, we'll talk about the urban revitalization, which will certainly have budgetary implications, but let's get the budget in front of us, finished and finalized first. Commissioner Clark.
Okay, sorry about that. I missed it going through this, and I'm glad you brought it up. So on the only question I had, and I thought we had talked a bit on a Zoom meeting, and since I'm new to the program, how do we adopt or look at it? But I has previously talked to Mr. New, and I personally have got a problem with the code enforcement side. And we had talked about defunding that position only. I know that's just a point that just one vote, but that's something I would like to discuss. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we did have a conversation during the last budget meeting when we had a deficit in the budget of trying to make that up by defunding the code enforcement officer. Now we have a balanced budget. We found some other money, but it's still obviously, and anytime something a commissioner can bring up and propose. Does anyone want to make a comment on that? Or are we happy with the budget and continue? I have had a few conversations with residents, generally actually in support of code enforcement, which is a little odd. Generally, the residents who have to deal with the code enforcement officer are dealing because there's been a complaint. But he does do some good if you're the one who has the complaint. So, Commissioner Coleman.
Well, I'm the one that brought it up last time, but after talking with the city manager, I think there's a personality little conflict there with who our present code enforcement guy is, and I think all that's going to be handled. I'm not in support of it now. I was really looking for money last time. I'm not going to be in support of this because we worked so hard to get us a code enforcement guy last time, and like I said, I think the city manager, he's, we can look at this next year, but I think we're going to be okay now. That's where I'm at on that right now.
Is there any, Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, so we were lacking funds when this was brought up. So what I'm hearing, and there's already been some talk, or evidently we're going to do some re-education. Is that what I'm kind of reading between the lines here. But we also looked at this funding, although it's a part-time position, some of the money gets rolled up into other stuff, which the manager explained that to me, and I got that perfectly. But we were also, my other question was going to take about 15,000 and see where we could put some if we had a good budget, which now we got a little extra money, was put toward the family plan for the employee insurance. That's another part of this, and I know it's quick for me, and if we can't get it on this year, I got it, but I would like to address it. How much money it would take, how many people would use it, and could we do it if we did have some extra money? That's just one of my things there. Thanks, man.
Okay, and I have discussed this a little bit with the manager, Commissioner Clark, when he was Commissioner-elect Clark brought up this is one of his things he'd really like to work on. I believe we have a 13,500 surplus right now. I'm not sure if we can get it on since we just renegotiated for this upcoming year, but I think I can't imagine insurance companies not taking our money. I think the question is doing the internal analysis about how many families we have, how many that need it, those kinds of things. You know, we haven't had a chance to talk about this as a commissioner, as a dais yet, but it's certainly something that I think we could ask staff to look at between now and the first reading of the budget. So, you know, I'd like to get a little bit of feedback from the rest of the commissioners because that would be allocating that present. We have, what was the number, Mike? It's 13,000 is the general number, right?
It's 15 and change.
15 and change. So right now there's a $15,000 surplus. And what Commissioner Clark is suggesting is that we offer a family insurance package for our employees right now. And I'm actually not going to speak to this because I'm not completely educated. I know there's different insurance levels depending on the kind of employee you are. So that's the internal study that needs to happen. Would the rest of the commission give me a head nod about directing staff to go see if we could offer that kind of family package? And if the 15,000 would cover it before the first reading of the budgets in September, which is this month now. Dallas, you want to speak to that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. It's lowering our family and dependent plan coverage is something that the city's looked at for several years because we understand that our dependent coverage is expensive. I believe this year for one of our plans, a family plan is $1,900 a month above and beyond what the city contributes. What we've seen in the past is the city currently pays 100% of the employees' coverage. There's typically two different programs that governments do. Either you get your employee coverage paid for 100%, and you pay a larger amount for dependent coverage, or you pay in towards your employee coverage and you have a smaller amount for dependent coverage. Looking at our peers in High Springs, Alachua, Gainesville, and Alachua County, to make any sort of a significant decrease in the amount of premium an employee would need to pay would be significantly more than $15,000 based on the coverage of the employees we have now who take the coverage. $15,000 may decrease their premium by $50 a month, maybe $100 a month. The other thing we don't know is, if you lower the cost to a lower cost, if that'll incentivize anybody else to jump on the plan. The manager and I have spoken about this and really digging into it for next year. We would not be able to really implement that this year as we are in the middle of open enrollment, and open enrollment ends next Wednesday. So employees have already chosen their plans for next year, and we've already put those into our system, but it's definitely something we're going to look at for fiscal year 2022.
Commissioner Coleman.
So our health insurance here is not like the counties where we tag with the state. We can't do that. Because the county is a subdivision of the state, they're allowed to tag into it. We've had those conversations. We've talked to other cities about pooling together to make an insurance pool. Federal law actually says that you cannot do that. You cannot pool together for the sole purpose of saving money on health insurance. There'd have to be some sort of other purpose of that group. So we've had conversations with FMPA or wholesale power provider about them perhaps
doing some sort of a group. Part of our issue why our insurance rates are high is because A, insurance rates are high, and B, being a small group, if we have one person who maybe has a heart attack or a cancer claim, it drives our claims way up. And for the last several years, we've had some employees with some serious medical issues, and Blue Cross Blue Shield has lost money on us. We pay Blue Cross Blue Shield about $600,000 a year for health insurance coverage, and they've spent more than that on our claims. So we're not a very attractive plan. We do shop our plans every year, but as I said, nobody really wants our plan because it costs them money.
So what it sounds like to me is that there is some interest to have this conversation. It also sounds like staff has been having this conversation for a few years trying to figure it out. So what I would ask Commissioner Clark is let's keep pushing this. Let's keep the conversation going in the upcoming year. Let's get a little bit more educated on it from our staff, and it'll definitely be a topic of conversation for the next budget cycle. Commissioner Coleman.
How out of the let's say our premium is $1,900 a month. Did you say that with family or family?
It was $1,900 if you wanted to add a dependent. It was $1,900 over. Is that right?
That's for full family coverage.
Full family. And how much is the city contributing to that?
The city contributes just shy of $700, which so the city offers 3 plans. The city pays 100% of employee coverage for the base level plan, plus a contribution to the HSA. Anything above and beyond that is on the employee. So if you want to buy up to a richer plan, or if you want dependent coverage, that difference is on the employee. We also do offer one thing, we do offer free dental and vision and life insurance and other supplemental insurance that some other entities don't offer.
Now I work with the school board, and they used to pay 100%. They don't pay 100% of our healthcare anymore. And we have to add on dental, vision, all those things are something we have to pay for. There is a dependent that you can add on, but it's hugely expensive as well. And they're a much larger, many more employees than we have. Any other considerations on the budget that's in front of us? Anything else that anyone wants to bring up, discuss, talk about before I asked staff to present to them? They've heard all of our comments about the urban revitalization. They've kind of meshed them together, and they have a presentation on that. But I want to make sure we finish this conversation first. If not, then we'll move right along then. Okay, Mr. Manager, present the urban revitalization.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a much better title to it than our working title among staff. So we got to incorporate urban revitalization plan. But the commission knows that they'd ask us to look at a couple of different areas, unpaved rural roads, unpaved local roads, or downtown roads, facilities for a new city hall, and facilities for potentially a new police station. Based on the last workshop, what staff took away as getting real direction was unpaved roads in our urban core. We talked about a connector project, road connector project in our urban core. City Hall got some traction, and the police station didn't get traction, but we took a look at that, and we think that we have some alternatives. If we go into, say, a temporary police station, like when we talked about that the last time we negotiated with High Springs, we were going to set up a temporary police station. We think we could likely do something temporary short-term on maybe the City Hall campus somewhere, or with some gyrations, an expanded City Hall campus. We also took another look at the fire department, and with some reconfiguration there, we definitely could put in a smaller short-term thing, and potentially with a tight squeeze, a long-term permanent fix. So we think that we've addressed most of it, and a lot of that credit goes to the commission who challenged us. We may have discounted some things early. The commission asked us to take a new look at it, and a new look reveals that, well, tight doesn't mean you can't. So we think we have a solution potentially for the police station as well. But that's not part of this, simply because an existing site would be no cost to us. So we feel like we checked that box off when we moved on. The unpaved roads in the urban core, Mr. Mayor, we discussed that. We currently have about 9,000 feet in our urban core, but of that 9,000 feet, 1,900 of it are in CSX right away, and about 800,000 of it are eligible for a grant fund. So we believe that, next slide, please, Dallas. It's kind of a highlight of the roads there visually. And here's a tabular view of the same roads. So we think that we can pave every one of those roads for right at $1 million. That does not include the roads in CSX right away because of the land rights issues associated with them. It'd be right at $1 million, and we think that we can get about $600,000 in grants potentially. So we think that the net cost to any type of program is going to be in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $500,000 to get all of the roads in our downtown area, except those in CSX right away, paved. Next slide, please, Dallas. So that brings us to project number 2 in this grouping, which is the connector road between State Road 26 and Southwest 15th Avenue. We discussed that as a potential. Right now, we know with the CSX railroad cutting through town and our schools being located off of 15th or on the south portion of town, we have a lot of morning traffic congestion issues, particularly on Southwest 260th, Southwest 250th, and on State Road 45. So this type of connector program would enable us to have an additional 20% more road capacity going through mostly an existing corridor. This is contingent upon us obtaining additional easement from CSX, which would be step number 1 in moving this through. We've met with a consultant. We've reviewed the plans with him. He specializes in obtaining these easements, and he indicates that he thinks that this project could be a win for us. The highlighted area, if you go back right there, I want to point out something. We had some renderings developed of how this potentially would look. That highlighted area is on private property, and it's a what if. It is not really a component of this program, and I don't want the public to necessarily get confused about the city's proposing to do all this on private property. We are not. This is, again, a rendering of what it could look like. But the part that's in public right-of-way, starting at State Road 26 and extending town south to Southwest 15th is what we're proposing and what we've developed pricing on. There is a short segment north of State Road 26. I met with FDOT some weeks ago, and right now it is slated to be part of their construction project. We figure that's a $750,000, $800,000 cost that the city shouldn't have to expend if we'll just be patient and let DOT get that, because it looks like we'll be ahead of their time frame if the commission directs us to move forward on these projects. Another benefit to this project is currently Seaboard Drive dead ends right around Southwest 3rd Avenue. And then we have some side streets, Southwest 5th, Southwest 7th, and Southwest 10th, that are dead end streets. This road will allow all of them to interconnect. We design it with traffic calming so that we don't have the speeding issues that we've seen in some other neighborhoods and the commission is aware of. So this one project would really solve a lot of interconnectivity problems in our downtown district. The total pricing on that, Dallas, if you'll advance the slide, there's a couple more profiles in here. Next slide just shows a profile where we'd have angle parking, and this is on the northern end of the project up near the library. And then this is a little further down when you get more into the residential district down by Southwest 5th and Southwest 7th, where we propose parallel parking. Oops, and costing for that. Did I drop that slide out? Go back one slide, please, Dallas. Okay, well, I guess the detail on that one project, the Seaboard Coastline Connector Road project, if that's the right slide, if you'd bring that back up, Dallas. The road infrastructure component of that is estimated at $2.6 million. The utility infrastructure that would go in there would be about $900,000. So total price tag to construct that road would be $3.5 million-ish. And I broke those out separately because we build roads out of our governmental funds, and we maintain utilities out of our enterprise funds. So I just wanted to know that this is a candidate for potential different funding sources as we move this project forward. Now we'll go back. Are there any questions about that connector road?
Mike, the $3.5 million is to go from 26th all the way to 15th in this concept. Is that right? I'm just confirming.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we developed a second concept that would require acquisition of road right-of-way through that parcel that you see right there. A big benefit of that, if the commission says we like that option, big benefit of that is it's such a circuitous path that the chances of there being a lot of that nuisance cut-through traffic goes way down. As people would come down Fifth, they would get essentially to where the car wash is now, the old abandoned car wash. They'd veer on what was an old right-of-way that was conveyed away to the current property owner. So the city would have to acquire that back. They'd get to Fifth, hit a stop sign, have to turn east, which would be a left-hand turn, come back down to the railroad, and then continue on. So it's a secondary concept that the traffic engineers came up with. The costs are relatively the same. It's a $3.5 million project either way. That includes, paving, parking, and sidewalks and street lighting, things you'd want to see in your urban core. And there are some worksheets floating about that describe those costs. If you don't have them, we will make sure you get them. We handed them out at the last meeting. And let me see, they look like
I've got two, I think, of the same thing.
Seaboard Drive. Those are two different renderings. One should be concept 1 and one should be concept 2.
This is 2 on both.
Oh, well, Amy handed you 2 of the same one, but there is a concept 1.
Yeah, it's 2.
I'm
Is-
sorry. I
Maybe one is in the concept or in the PowerPoint deck. Oh, okay. What's our,
Because the only difference I'm seeing is in the hypothetical renderings of what a connector road like this might spur in terms of private development. Is there something different in the
Yes,
road?
Mr. Mayor.
One goes off. Okay, I see it now. I thought that was a road that went all the way through.
In concept,
Is it?
in one of the concepts, the main drag stays adjacent to the railroad, and it bypasses the potential development. So it stays south of the corridor all the way down the railroad track. The other concept, it jogs off into that development. So there'd kind of be a main road running right through the development. I need to pull up my
So
renderings.
it's concept 2 that keeps the road just straight down the, 'cause I'm having a hard time seeing through the trees here. Concept 2,
Correct.
okay,
Yeah,
I got
concept 2 is the straight shot down.
I'm with you.
Concept 1 is the one that goes through the development.
That conclude your questions, Commissioner Martin, or is it just beginning your questions?
on the surface, concept 1 does not grab my attention as much as concept 2. I like the idea of running it parallel along the railroad tracks and letting the developer handle their own internal infrastructure, that sort of thing. And I think having the jog at Fifth Avenue kind of defeats a little bit of the purpose of trying to get the flow to go through from 16th over to 26th, particularly in the morning. The only other question I had, with regards to some of the aesthetics of it, is it possible that we can at least maybe push that part of it off instead of trying to do it all at once and phase in some of the expenses, lighting up, a mile of roadway that's lighting up for nothing. I feel like maybe there's an opportunity there that we could phase in some of these expenses. I realize there's some benefit to stubbing power and all that kind of stuff in there while you're there, but $3.5 million is a lot to swallow.
Mr. Mayor, first, staff concurs with Commissioner Martin regarding concept 1 versus concept 2. And we believe that typically concept 2 would result in slower traffic, but we believe that if you're designing it from scratch, you can put in the traffic calming that would necessary and keep traffic slow with concept 1. So we concur that is, maybe I got them backwards. The straight shot through is the best way to go. Concept 2 is better. The concept 1 was their first take at it, and staff agreed with you and said, no, we want to see a straight through concept. It became concept 2, and that's the one that we believe is what the commission is most enthusiastic about it. With regards to phasing the addition of amenities or infrastructure, road construction is one of those things that when you get it open, you better get it open. And I'll give you an example. We can lay sewer pipe for $35 a lineal foot when it's all torn up and it's going in. If I have to simply go back and address anything by opening up the asphalt, we're adding, just for the first foot, a $15,000 expense just to get into it. So we install PVC conduit for irrigation or for electric utilities, $20–25 a foot if we're laying it with construction. We have to come back and put it in. We were going to use a directional boring method so it won't tear up our nice paved roads.
Yeah, I get.
And it would be 6 times more expensive.
I
10
get
times.
that part. I guess maybe I'm more directed towards the above ground stuff that we can go back and do later. Tree shrubbery, yeah, the posts, the lighting, those sorts of aesthetics above ground.
Completely within the commission's discretion, but streetlights don't work without underground conduit. So again, the cheapest way is to go. I'd say the easiest thing to come back and retrofit would be the landscaping. But things like even street lighting, if we come back, we're going to see a 25 to 50% increase in the cost to provide that lighting.
I think we're messed up there, Tim. You were just talking about not putting in, you were wanting the infrastructure in, but just not the light poles set in yet. So you would be able to run your electrical, your water, everything already, so we don't re-tear up anything. I think that's where we were at.
And are you back off? I think, I mean, what I'm hearing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that the light, putting the actual lamppost in is a negligible part of that money. Once the infrastructure is in, the lampposts are a small part. I guess my question would be, it kind of makes sense to me that some part of Seaboard Drive gets wrapped into our downtown and has a mirrored look. So the lampposts look similar. It looks like we are creating a downtown area that encourages that economic growth. But I'm not sure that we need these kind of decorative lampposts all the way down. So I'm not sure where the break is on this. I'm kind of limited in my mind to thinking of the festivals, which go down as far as the road goes right now. So in my mind, we would sort of end where the road is now and try to tie that part in. But that's also just sort of an arbitrary marker in my brain because that's where we have our festivals. So I would approach it from that stance. At some point, this road needs to look like a decorative downtown street that has the shrubbery and the trees and those lampposts. Maybe the other part doesn't need all of those kinds of amenities. I think that the trees and those bulbs in are the natural speed scaping that we could do. But maybe there's a way to get what Commissioner Martin is after and what staff is saying about the upfront initial cost. So I think we should need to pick how deep we want our downtown to go. And maybe it's a visual marker.
Well, because is south of Fifth Avenue, for instance, you're getting into more neighborhood area where I don't know if that sells lighting that whole section up. I'm not sure even the parallel parking necessarily or is necessary. What was the thinking about the jog there at 10th Avenue versus just going straight down to 15th and going behind that house? Because I'm a little hesitant of kind of creating a main thoroughfare where there is not one right now, because I think that would get a lot of traffic down through that area. And the other is right here where the quote brewery is. There almost looks like there is a break in the roadway there. Is that, I mean, it looks like there's aesthetic porch lights that go across what would be a road, but you tell me.
Mr. Mayor, several things to address there. I'll start backwards. The graphic artist that developed this, which is not a traffic engineer, but the graphic artist that developed this, proposed traffic calming there, some sort of street treatment. In their mind, it could be raising the elevation of the road about 6 inches, which is now a very common type street treatment that causes people to slow down. It's not a speed hump, it's more of a speed table, but you see them in some urban districts, or maybe just changing the texture from regular asphalt to some sort of a paver, just something to break the texture of the road so that a driver slows. So it was their attempt at traffic calming. It certainly doesn't have to be there, or it could be there, but that's what it was intended. With regards to the question about where it's more urban in nature and where it's more residential in nature, staff sees that break point somewhere around Fifth Avenue. And we kind of see that everything north of Fifth Avenue would have a greater intensity in parking and probably a greater intensity in things like street lighting and landscaping. But in the road actually from Fifth South would be residential in nature, a residential street. And that's what we've proposed. I mean, there's less trees, but again, these are renderings. We think that in residential neighborhoods, all new residential neighborhoods, we are trying to solve the parking problem. So 7th is supposed to connect. The artist missed that. So 7th would connect, 5th would connect, 10th would connect. And so, but once we get into detail, we can say there is no street parking, but currently there's people parking there. And so we would have to make accommodations where if there's curbing, we got to provide for parking. If we say we're not going to have curb street, we want open shoulders, then we'll just have people parking on grass right away like we currently have.
Well, and Mike, I do want you to address Commissioner Mark's question about cutting in there on around, but I also do want to remind the commission and everyone watching that really the question in front of us tonight is, do we want to make a connector road between 15th and Newberry Road? If that answer to that is yes, then all of these fine detailed questions are going to come. There are going to be workshops on workshops for us to work all that out. We're going to hire an engineer. They're going to come back with more specific questions. So I don't want to squash the conversation because, you know, if we say, well, you know, we want that connector, but we don't need the enhanced, you know, downtown look, that may affect how much we need to borrow or how we're going to fund it. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of these things are questions that are probably for another workshop. The question we need to figure out tonight is this a project we want to move forward or not? But I am interested in that question of the cutoff. So if you could tell us why wouldn't we just go straight down? That'd be great.
Mr. Mayor, these are all great questions, but that one in particular, we evaluated that. We do not believe that it will meet any type of safety standard to bring that intersection out so close to that railroad crossing where they have the cross arms there. It's your utility director, public works director's opinion. It's my opinion, and it's also our traffic engineer's opinion that the proximity of that intersection to that CSX railroad crossing would be denied by CSX. And we feel like that the closest we could bring in would be where we're depicting it here on 10th.
Other questions from the commission? And I guess, I should say my vision of this road is that this is not a 20-mile-an-hour neighborhood connection. This is a road that you can 30, 35 miles an hour is going to get you from 15th to Newberry so that you can get out. This is not a neighborhood street if we can get it where we're up against the railroad tracks. Now that may just be my preconceived notion. Commission may see this as a quiet, very slow neighborhood type of road, but I was seeing this more as a connection to get you where you want to go. Commissioner Clark, do you have another comment?
If we vote on this, when we say this, are we looking at starting it this year with what money? And then how far out is the projection to where we have to come up with the 3.5, but I take it 700,000 is off that and possibly as a grant manager?
That's going to be the next conversation. That'll be like in 30 seconds.
Okay.
So he's gone over the,
Right, but
The
there was
police
some money, but
department.
when will it come into effect?
Right.
And when will we start and when will we end?
that's what we're going to,
Okay,
if we like these projects, then we'll shift to how do we pay for it? When will it start? Those kinds of things.
and I just don't know that 30 or 40 mile an hour speed limit, putting it through that neighborhood that is not there now is gonna be.
Yeah, I think on that little cut through, that's got to be a
I just wonder
neighborhood.
if there's any way to check before we say yes or no.
Yeah, and we'll check before we do anything. So tonight, do we like these projects? Then we'll talk about the details of the projects. We'll do all that fine tuning. I agree with you. If we're going to cut through that neighborhood, that section there has to be a 20-mile-an-hour neighborhood. Obviously, we want to do things to make those neighbors feel comfortable. So we're going to let it finish. We still have this, and we have City Hall. And we'll look at the numbers for all three of those, and then we'll see how we want to move forward and what the timeline would be.
Mr. Mayor, just
Yes,
want to comment on, I guess, two things. One, to Commissioner's question about deferring. I would say if staff were proposing a pay-as-we-go, let's do as much as we can afford this year, and then we'll take on a little bit more and a little bit more. But the way that the commission has asked us to look at this is we're going to make an annual payment on this. And so if you say we want to defer any component of it for 2 or 5 years, then you won't get that levelizing effect of a 20 or 25 or 30 year note like we're asking. So what we'd have to then decide is we anticipate one of those years we're going to have a jump in expense, a regular mortgage payment plus this new cost. And so I think that if we're using the pay-as-we-go approach, then phasing infrastructure add-in, it lends itself more to that. Again, this is completely the commission's decision, just providing insights. When you're going to take out a mortgage, a debt service to do the project, I think the most efficient way to spend the taxpayers' money, do it all up front, and then just pay off the debt service annualized over whatever period of time the commission thinks is appropriate. And just a comment, staff sees this as a 20 to 25 mile an hour road, probably the whole way through. The real benefit in terms of time is that we're proposing that there's no stopping. Drivers feel like they're making progress as long as we keep them moving. So we can do traffic calming at different stages, but as long as they're not having to stop at a stop sign or a red light, people feel pretty good about how they're moving through traffic. Mr. Mayor, with that, we'll move on to the proposed projects at the Municipal Complex, City Hall project. And again, this is a workshop that we had earlier in the year. I believe it was in February. There are some conceptual renderings. I would not get too wrapped around architectural styles and things like that. Those are, if the commission says, yeah, we want to spend the money and move this way, then the time to start working on what it looks like and how it's going to feel will be coming fairly quickly. The architect at that time recommended that we see if he wanted to evaluate whether we could keep it on the existing campus. He felt like that, if the community is committed to downtown, having City Hall and the Municipal Complex in that downtown was vital. And we were adding more staffing. We were adding staffing, proposing to add staff from the annex building across the street. The commission expressed some interest in bringing staffing out of Little Red Schoolhouse. And so what the architect went out looking for was, can we fit a larger facility on the existing site? That's what this is demonstrating, is that graphically we can put all that out there. The architect did indicate that he believed that our project would go to 2-story, but we should really take efforts to make sure that the second story to the north, a 2-story building to the north, does not take away to the 1-story building that we currently using for City Hall. Yes, sir.
And I would just want to point this graphic out to folks watching at home, because one of the projects that the commission is having to keep its eye on is law enforcement. As most of you know, Clovis Watson won the election. I think the Republican candidate officially withdrew today. So Clovis Watson is the sheriff-elect. So we're in a kind of a gray area, because our contract with law enforcement was with Sheriff Darnell, was not with necessarily ASO by itself. So one of the things we want to make sure is that we continue to provide the commission some options. And so when the city manager said at the beginning that we're presenting three variations of the ideas that this commission has asked about, but we're not including the police station in that, it's because the next step in that police department conversation, it was land acquisition. As you can see by the addition of City Hall, 2 Little Red schoolhouses, and the annex building, not to mention the fact that we expect to acquire the spot over here where cold storage was. We think we have a good chance of being able to fit that police station here. We think we have a good chance of being able to fit it over at the fire department. So since the first step this commission directed staff to do was go out and figure out where this would be, we've got 2 really good options the commission to consider if that becomes an eventuality, right? So I just want to make sure everyone can see that sort of visually before we move on. Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Fair. That's a great point of clarity. So next slide, please, Dallas. Is just some detailed information about, what our current space needs. We currently use about 6,000 square foot of space to house the staff that we propose in the new City Hall. The architect indicates that, to meet a 25 to 30-year horizon, we need to plan on project space of 12,000 square feet. He indicated that it could be designed in a modular format so that we do 10,000 square feet and add on 2,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet in the future when that need is realized. That's certainly something we'll be looking at if the commission says, yeah, we're going to get serious and go into design phase. We'll start having those conversations about that. The proposal that's out there is that we would repurpose our existing City Hall. We don't know exactly, but it's a nice building, and it's 3,100 square feet. It could certainly be repurposed to house staff and would result in a cost savings if we were able to repurpose it and utilize it for office space. So the cost estimate to add 9,000 square feet of new office space and repurpose 3,100 square feet at City Hall ranges in this slide from 2.5 million to 3.5 million. I think the next slide we refined it. We did a little better job of refining it. So in this table, this is a summary. We have the last project listed as the City Hall expansion is 2.9 million. We feel pretty good about that number based on Williston's new City Hall project. They were probably around 2.2 million. We've seen construction cost increase quite a bit, and that's a bigger facility. So we think that a 2.9 million number would be suitable for what the commission has indicated it wants to see in terms of size and scope of that project. The projects that we previously discussed, downtown road paving and the Seaboard Drive Connector Road, are also identified. So we're looking total for those 3 projects. One is 2 components, is 7.485 million. And I think at this point, and we think that maybe 700,000 is available to us in the grant funding program. So that could, pull that price down to closer to 7 million. And I think at this point, Dallas is going to take us through our funding options, how staff would propose that we pay for these proposed improvements.
Okay, before we do that, let's have just a little bit of conversation. All of these are projects that the commission has put forth, has pushed for at varying levels of intensity over the past 3-4 years, right? So we've kind of come to a crossroads of, are we ready to move on these? I've been really impressed and proud of this commission for taking on projects that have seemed to languish. You guys undertook the firehouse renovation, the Kincaid building, the charter review. I mean, you've never shirked at taking on projects. So before we go into, all these conversations, are these 3 projects that this commission really is interested in trying to figure out? Because to me, that's the fundamental question. Everything else after that is a detail, right? If we want to do these 3 things, great. But we say to staff, we want them, but it's got to come in at 6.7. So get that grant, take something out, right? This is our comfort range. Or I can't stomach that much. I'm not ready to move forward on one of these. So let's talk about the other 2. I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about how to pay for them if at the end of that 30-minute conversation, hour-minute conversation, the majority of the convention says, yeah, but I don't really have any interest in doing that one, right? So are all 3 of these things that we want to try to figure out how to make happen? Commissioner Clark.
I'd like to see that. Can we look at that before we? I can't really make a decision because I'm brand new to the dice. So
Well, and
I need to
granted,
look where the money's coming from.
yeah, the decision always is predicated on how do we pay for it, those kinds of things. But we're about to get into some pretty heavy details here. So if there's one of these that people say, I don't care about expanding City Hall, deal with it. It's 30 years old, but it'll work for another 10 years. Then that changes the conversation. So if I'm not hearing anybody advocating for yanking any of this out, then let's go into the how do we pay for it, and maybe that'll make it palatable, maybe not. Commissioner Martin.
The only thing I don't have as much tolerance for is the paving all the unpaved roads in downtown as they're listed here, because so much of it hinges on the possibility of doing the grant. The other 2, I'm probably about a 7 out of 10.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to weigh in, or is everyone ready to move forward? Only thing I would say about the grant for the roads is I think we're a dead shoe-in for that one. I think we tick every box on that one. So I don't have any doubt that we're gonna be successful on that one. We've been killing these CDBG grants. It's the same program. So I have a high level of confidence in that. But we could certainly, if we want to move forward, we could say to staff, we want to prioritize, and we'll move forward with that project contingent on successfully getting the grant. If we don't get the grant, come back to us, and we'll return that portion of if we borrow the money or whatever we need to do. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, that's a great point. I'd point out that what we've proposed for you is that we don't get the grant. The 7.5 million that is there assumes we don't get a grant. We put as a sidebar that we think we can get a grant, and we think it'll buy down the total debt service if we are successful.
Okay, hearing no other comments, Mr. Manager, or Dallas, take us through our options. If we wanted to do the whole thing, we assuming we're not going to get the grant, how would this look, and what kind of decisions would the commission have to make?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. Assuming that the commission wanted to go ahead with all 3 projects, we would need to take about $7.7 million out in a bond, which is the cost of the projects plus 2.5% closing costs. You have a couple different options of how to structure it. I've given you 2 different options here, but obviously the commission can go on a shorter payment or a longer payment. We're looking at a 20 or a 30-year debt service. At 30 years, you'd be looking at about $260,000 annually. At a 20-year payment, you'd be looking at $390,000 annually. And obviously, you'd be saving interest in the long run. We would propose to make that debt service payment that you could raise your millage rate by half a mil. That would generate about $235,000 based off of the current year's rates. We would also be looking at a road assessment, which would include the entirety of the city. Initial conversations could lead to different rates, whether you're an urban resident or a rural resident. We could set that to generate the same amount as the millage of $235,000. That would generate a total of $470,000 a year, of which we would propose $390,000 for the bond payment at 20 years. The other $80,000 the city commission would have each year for enhanced road projects. Obviously, if you take out a bond and you bond the entire amount, you're not going to see any other projects with that money for the course of the bond. So if you're doing a 20-year payment, that assessment's just going to pay debt service for 20 years on that project. So if you increase it a little bit throughout the course of that 20 years, you can have other projects continuing on with those assessment dollars. Obviously, if the commission wanted to do a 30-year payment, we could lower both of those rates significantly, or if the commission wanted to put more millage or less millage, or more an assessment, less an assessment, that's certainly an option. And then, as always, the commission could also adopt a water service tax or some other taxing implement to fund these options.
Okay, thank you, Dallas. And I think there was a lot that Dallas just said in the assessment. There's a lot of variations in that assessment. If you want to do a road assessment and everyone pays into that, that it is possible for us to have the flexibility to say that people who live in the urban core who are recognizing a higher level of service in paved roads would pay X, whereas people living in a rural area who are really recognizing a little bit more lime rock, more frequency of grading, would pay Y. It's also true that there's a higher population density in the urban core, so they might pay the same thing, and still the urban core would realize a higher level of service because there's less population in the rural area. Again, those are the kinds of things that we would direct staff to say, okay, we want to do some variation of this. Now go out and dig deeper into what that assessment looks like. Who pays what? How much does that generate? How long does the payment need to be, the 20 or 30 years? So is this is staff's best guess at how to piece this together? Assessment, millage. There's no other revenue source that you would propose as an option. These are your two cleanest, I'm guessing.
Mr. Mayor, millage and a combination of the millage and the assessment would be the cleanest. As we discussed in the capital projects workshop, there are a couple of other funding mechanisms you could use. Like millage and assessment are by far the most common throughout the state. People are used to them. They're very clear. I think people in Newberry are also used to the assessment methodology from our fire assessment. We would propose a combination of those two.
Okay, commission thoughts on this concept? Remember that in order to first levy an assessment, we need to hire a company that would do a study that would figure out all these questions for us. What are the housings in Newberry? Who's realizing what service? And they would probably give us at least some suggestions about ranges of what would be equitable and fair across the board. Now that study is about a $20,000 to $30,000 study. Once you have the initial study, then it's a smaller fee on a yearly basis to update it. They come and see who moved in, who moved out, what the values are. It's the exact same process, different level of complexity that we use with the fire assessment. But that would be what we would be discussing, which is a concept that we've been talking about for a while now, of how do we address our roads in Newberry in a more fiscally responsible way than perhaps other governing entities around us are doing. So that's what we're trying to, let's get ahead of this problem before it gets away from us. that 80,000 for enhanced road projects at the bottom would potentially be where the rural areas would get recognized, right? They would get the more rock, they get the grading more frequently. Perhaps you could, set aside a piece of that every year to chip seal a mile of road. I think you set aside a portion for every 2 to 3 years, you could probably get a mile of road out of that, and slowly start to kind of move your way around the city. So that's as much ad-libbing as I can give you. Now we need some feedback from the dais. Thoughts? Commissioner Clark?
Yeah, so the assessment's basically above and we're gonna divide that through all the city. Whether I am totally against upping the taxes. I could just say that right now. I got it. Maybe we scale back one project and pick up another project and do it that way instead of the whole. We don't need the 7.7 million to do one road or this building or the next project. So personally, I'm in for figuring out how we could come up with it, one big project at a time, whether it's the municipal part or the road part, but not all three for me.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Martin?
The city hall expansion, I feel, is more, it addresses everybody. The Seaboard project addresses people along that area, and paving the inner core streets serve just those people as well. So I have a little bit of more of an appetite, I guess, for the city hall project because I feel like it serves a broader number of citizens. And the other hang up I have about the Seaboard project is dumping more traffic onto 26. The idea is to get more people off of 15th over to 26 faster, which I appreciate that part, but unless it syncs up with the FDOT project, dumping more traffic onto an already overloaded road will be a bit of a challenge for us. I also recognize the opportunity for potentially the lower interest rate. And is there, and maybe we talked about this during or maybe after the meeting last time, is there, similar to when we build a home, until you get the CO, you only pay the interest. Is there some dynamic about having the money earmarked for us, but we only pay for what we use as we use, to where we can take advantage of maybe interest rates now, but not have the principal payment until we actually are doing this? Because if this doesn't sync up for another 5 years, I don't want to be paying for it maybe for 5 years. And maybe I'm not saying it congruently enough to follow, but work with me, I guess.
And well, I'll invite Dallas to chime in, but I believe that things like the bond that Dallas is referring to will work like a construction loan. The interest rate floats. You don't lock it in now and then borrow the money in 5 years. You lock the interest rate out when you get the money. But we would kind of bookmark the loan. We would make application and have it set up. We would take probably a draw to get us through the design phase, administration. That's usually 10 to 15% of the cost of the project. And then when we are ready to go to bid, then we take the next, the big chunk of it out then. And that's when the debt service, and we would finalize that interest rate. That's how our SRF loans for water and wastewater worked. We have, as you know, we hear us talk about a water loan and a wastewater loan, but actually each of those is broken into two. There's the design phase, which has one interest rate, and there was the construction phase, which has a second interest rate. You lock them in at the time that you take the money. much like a construction loan would be on your home.
Mr. Mayor, to that point, if we're going to do a bond, true bond, you don't really do draws. You can issue separate series of bonds. So you can have a one bond issuance and then smaller bond issuances as part of it to draw. If we wanted to do a construction loan type of plan, we could certainly do that. I would remind the commission that if this is the route that we're going, and the commission wanted to make these projects happen, we would start the process and get the money at the beginning of fiscal year 2022, and our first payment wouldn't be due until a year after that. So we're looking for 2.5 years out before the first payment is due, and we would start construction in 2022, fiscal year 2022.
And that would roughly put the completion, if FDOT is looking at 2024 now, and we don't start construction until 2022, they would be aligning, and we could probably work on that to make sure that that we don't dump that traffic out. I mean, I think I have a hard time, differentiating when it comes to roads, because roads are infrastructure that everyone is eventually going to use. And that was sort of how the conversation evolved from addressing all of the roads in Newberry to addressing the urban core. I mean, I understand that if I live here, I'm going to use that connector road more often. But if that encourages economic development, then the whole city benefits. Having an entire urban core that's paved, I think, as a benefit to the entire city. I certainly understand, and I agree that City Hall is something we all partake in. We all look at it as a source of pride. I know that this building, I get compliments on it all the time. 30 years old. It's an attractive building. And again, I would remind the commission that, previous commissions let the firehouse department go for over 30 years without putting a dollar into it. And it ended up costing us more money to try to bring it up and fix it, because they didn't do what you guys are engaged in right now, which is looking ahead and saying, how do we address this, in a reasonable way before we have a rock that holds the door shut because the door won't close anymore, right? So, I understand the comments, but I see all of these as infrastructure investments. The bulk of it comes down to roads, and then you've got a piece here at City Hall, which we all engage in. Mr. Jones, would you chime in?
Well, to Commissioner Martin's question, Mayor, there is a funding mechanism that kind of does what he describes. It's called a bond anticipation note. I don't recommend it because basically you pay a very low percentage of the interest and you have a balloon payment at the end when you take the bond out. I've been involved with those before, and they're very risky for the governmental entity that takes them out.
I'm actually for all three of them. They're going to be being done by contractors. I don't know where it's going to have the stress on staff, besides Jamie, but he can take it. The City Hall is my main priority. We're already out of space big time. And I'm also with Commissioner Clark. We can't do this by increasing our millage. I'm not for that at all. Really, I mean, if it was, and I hate to say it this way, but I am, if it was a ballpark going in debt for, yeah, nah. But we're talking about infrastructure, like you just said, Mayor. I'm for all of them, but number one is City Hall. My last would be the connecting to 15th Avenue. But if we're going to borrow the money, at least we're doing it on some, because I mean, previously, I don't think we've looked far enough ahead, and we've run, I mean, the firehouse right there just goes ahead and shows you what we were up against. So that's where I'm at. And That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. I had just to piggyback on that. I kind of wish we had this idea about the connector road for 15th about 5 or 10 years ago. You know, now that we've got the elementary school and we got the town center, I mean, that's the kind of long-term visioning that I appreciate from you guys. And Mike or Dallas, remind me, because we got to this large sum, which is a scary sum of money because of the really, really low interest rates right now. And we had a conversation about bundling, because it's certainly the comment and the perspective from Commissioner Clark that, well, let's pick one and do one at a time and kind of pay it off. But it was the low interest rates and the fact that all three of these projects have got some support of why we ended up bundling them. But if you can go back to the slide, I mean, if you take a 30-year note, then you're getting it closer in the range of being able to accomplish this just with the assessment. But I'm not sure you can pay for City Hall through an assessment. I know you can do a roads assessment and pay for roads, but can you pay for City Hall through an assessment?
Mr. Mayor, I'll ask Dallas to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that you could not pay for a City Hall facility through an assessment because of some state law that has to do with assessments have to add value to property. Did I get that right, Mr. Finance Director?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, the manager is correct. That an assessment has to provide a benefit to property. That's why we would propose paying it half and half out of assessment and millage. That way the millage portion is paying for the City Hall expansion and the assessment portion is paying for the road enhancements.
So in staff's mind, the way that you're proposing this is the millage 100% goes to City Hall. Everyone's benefiting from that. The assessment goes to roads, and then everyone benefits proportionally to that, which is where we get those number breakdowns at the bottom, depending on whether you're rural or urban part of Newberry. So there's really no way to do City Hall through an assessment. If you want to expand City Hall and improve City Hall, is there any other way than millage to pay for that?
Mr. Mayor, the city could raise the water public service tax, which would generate $85,000 a year. That wouldn't be enough in and of itself to make the payment. So yeah, without a tax increase or cutting other projects, I'm not aware of another funding source.
So let's say on a 20-year payment without millage, without assessment, 300. So you're saying on a 20-year note, you're putting in there that 0.5 mils, which is $235K. Is the 20-year payment? Is that yearly or is that? Yeah, it's yearly, right? A year.
Yes, sir.
And we're saying that a half mil, we're going to get 235 to pay towards that a year.
Yes, sir.
Wait a minute. Yeah, well, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna listen. I think even Tim's. Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, only we're kind of dominating the conversation, but I would be curious what Bonnie and Paul have to say.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Farnsworth, please join the conversation.
thank you. I agree. I believe all three projects need to be done. And really the only way they're going to be done is if we do raise the millage, unless we cut programs in other places. And we start cutting services in other places, we've pretty much kept our budget to a very strict budget where we don't have a whole lot of leeway anywhere. And these projects are for the whole city. It's not just for a certain group. So I believe that we need to consider raising the millage rate to cover it.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Farnsworth. Commissioner Norfleet, did you want to chime in here? Or are you still just listening? Commissioner Norfleet, are you with us? Your volume was really low before. If you're talking right now, we can't hear you, or at least I can't. Just whenever you keep trying and whenever you get in, we'll pause and give you the floor. But since we can't hear you, I'm going to go ahead and allow Commissioner Clark to have the floor again. Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Mayor, so I reckon where I have the projects, I got it. We need stuff like this done. But if you raise the millage rate, that's a tax. If you give the assessment, it's another tax. So we got a payment of $390. Why do we have to go with the $390 on the bond payment and $80,000 extra? I mean, or can we come up with some more money in the city and not raise the mills so high? Something.
I think, and I think this is important to clarify. This is like a general statement. If you guys say, let's go, these are going to be fine tuned as we go. Right. The only thing that we could even consider doing right now would be a little bit of an increase on the millage in order to start the engineering and the plans and all of those kinds of things. The assessment we can't do right now. We have to get the study first. We've got to do public workshops. We have to have public hearings in order for us to move forward with that. It occurs to me, I would be okay with a 30-year payment on the city hall, because I think you could probably get 30 years out of a building. You're amortizing that. Every generation's kind of paying their fair share. A paved road, we've always heard, has about a 20-year life cycle. So I think roads now are 30. Oh, that's a great news. So that's right. So, to me, the payment should last as long as the infrastructure lasts. And that way, when that road is out, whoever's living here 30 years from now, they paid their fair share of maintaining that infrastructure. So, but those are the kind of details that we can get into later, where we want to say, because splitting it 50-50, well, clearly, City Hall is roughly 50% of that, of what is proposed. So, if you guys want to move forward with all these things, we're not going to take out the loan tomorrow. We're not going to make any of these specific decisions tomorrow. The only thing that we need to consider immediately is perhaps an increase on the millage just to get the ball rolling on all of these things. And that could be 0.2, that could be 0.25, right? It could be anywhere up to 6.4, right? And I guess we should ask some questions of staff of how much would that get us? Each 0.1% is $9,000. Did I remember that right? Is that a different amount? That's the water tax. So each 1/10 of a millage gets us what? Is Paul clicking in? So I'm going to see if Paul is with us, but each 1/10 of a percentage is 47,000. So how much would we look, if we wanted to move forward all three of these, how much would we need this year to spend on engineering, planning, that kind of thing? And while y'all are thinking on that, let me check in with Commissioner Norfleet. Commissioner Norfleet, see if we can hear you now. I see your face.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can y'all hear me?
Yep, you have the floor, sir. Go ahead.
My thoughts on it was, right now the city is currently growing at a pretty good rate. I think all the projects are valuable and would be a good projects, but if we raise millage rates now to pay for it, or try to raise some kind of revenue stream to pay for it, and the city goes through a recession where it's not growing at the rate that it is now, we're not going to have that natural occurring increase in revenues from the growth. my question is, what are we going to do at that point if we kind of exhaust all our revenue increases now for this stuff?
I think that's a good, what I was saying when you couldn't hear me, is that the main question you want to hear the conversation turn towards, Commissioner? I want to make sure we get all your comments and questions just in case we lose you.
Yeah, just kind of where the, like I said, right now we're in a growth stage. So what's going to happen when we're not in that growth stage and we're still having to pay for this stuff,
I always think that's one of the questions I have, is that we make predictions based on the current, what at current 0.5 millage rate would get us. And it's hard to know where we'll be in 5 years. We have no idea of knowing, does that 0.5 get us the same? Does it get more? Does it get us less? We hope that it gets more, because we hope that we continue to grow. So, so the crux of Commissioner Norfleet's question is, these projections are based on our current level of growth. What happens if you hit a recession? You've made these predictions at that point in time. I know none of us have a crystal ball, but does the manager want to take a crack at the options? I mean, you could raise the millage again. You could increase the assessment, right? You can cut more services, right?
Mr. Mayor, all of that is true. I would tell you that seeing a depreciation in taxable values is a rare occurrence. We've seen it. We've all seen it once in the last 20 years, but it was fairly unprecedented when it happened. I wouldn't say it's something that we would count on moving forward. We are seeing 5% growth rates as staff, and in my background in training and engineering, we would never project future revenues based on 5% growth rate. We'd pick a modest 2.5%, and that's it. And we estimate revenues conservatively. We estimate expenses generously, so that we don't get trapped. So we can't predict what will come down the pipes, but we try not to make suggestions or present options to the city commission that are high risk without putting that big asterisk on it and suggesting there's high risk. You had asked earlier about additional revenue sources. Staff is not promoting necessarily anything. We do believe that the commission's decision to diversify its revenues is a very solid one. We talked in one of our budget workshops about increasing the general fund transfer from the electric fund. That is worthy of consideration. We do a survey every year to see what municipal electrics transfer. We transfer 5%. The average is somewhere in the 8% range. And independently owned electric companies, they are allowed to use 12 to 14% in their rate making. I would suggest, because this community and this commission remembers a time when the electric fund transfer was maybe dubbed out of control. I think that was very cyclic, and that seemed to be what got the community more in protest or in an uproar. I think that if it's a measured move where the commission understands what it's doing and remains conservative, I think the public has a much greater appetite if the commission says we want to move to 7.5 or 8% for that general fund transfer. We showed you a slide earlier tonight. The average customer in Newberry is paying 20% less for their electric utilities in 2020 than they were in 2011.
Mr. Mayor, to follow up on the manager's comments, whenever it comes to millage, we always estimate our millage at 95% of the tax value, not at 100%. So we do take a discount into account on the millage, the ad valorem. I would also state that The numbers presented tonight are based off of fiscal year 2021's taxable values. Again, our first payment would not be due until fiscal year 2023, so you'd have 2 more years of hopeful appreciation in tax values and that growth, as the manager was mentioning earlier.
I still think it's always a good thing for us to consider. We make decisions based on the world today, and it's really difficult to predict the world 5 years from today. You know, most folks don't know, but in the Great Recession of 2007, Newberry was one of the only cities in this area to continue to increase our property values. We weathered that recession very well. You don't know that. You weren't here then. So before your time. So we have traditionally done pretty well. But that is not to say that good fortune will continue. Did you come up with an answer to the question of what would the commission be looking at if we wanted to move forward all 3 of these? What would we need to spend this year in terms of engineering, project management, those kinds of things to discuss those topics?
Mr. Mayor, typical design and planning fees, survey fees for these types of projects are in the 10 to 12% range. So for a $7 million project, we're talking $700,000 to $800,000. I don't believe that we could fully complete those designs in a year's time. I think that we probably would advance these projects far enough along to be only in the $250,000 or $300,000 range. I'll give an example. The roadway design will require, as step number 1, getting CSX to agree to an easement. That we would spend maybe $25,000, $30,000 doing the survey work and getting a consultant and a plan to CSX, and that likely could take us 6 months, 6, 7 months. And we're really not going to dig into the design until we have that. No sense in designing a road where we don't have road rights to do it. So we think that $200,000 to $300,000 would be what we would spend on these projects this year.
And that would get us significantly down the start of each of those 3 projects if we wanted, so that in the next fiscal year we're shovel ready,
Teeing it up. Yes, sir.
so to say. Okay, Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Martin.
My one in Dallas, or the manager making, it is on. Anyway. Are we projecting more money next year because COVID hit this year on our bed taxes or anything from the county that would raise us up for more money next year?
Well, I'll defer to
No extra coming versus what this year's budget is?
Mr. Mayor, we don't receive any direct funding from the county. If you're talking about property taxes, for next year, we don't anticipate too much of a loss based on what the property appraiser is telling us, tax collector. We did take a higher percentage. So typically when I budget our ad valorem taxes for the operating budget, I look at a historical trend of what percentage of our property taxes actually get paid. It's typically between 97.5% and 98% of our tax levy actually gets paid. So that's what I budget. I did cut that by a full percent this year to 96.5%, taking into consideration that we may have some more delinquencies in our taxes.
Well, I'm kind of like the mayor. I don't have a crystal ball, but you got to understand that our property tax values were based on what was January 1st for this year, which that's really upset a lot of people because there's a lot of people out of work and stuff. I don't project that we're going to have a huge downswing. I mean, our real estate values have stayed. It's unbelievable, especially on the west side of the county. So that's where I'm at.
Mr. Mayor, to follow up on Commissioner Coleman's insight, as we showed at our last workshop, real estate sales have continued to be healthy. The average price of a home sale is going up, and the average amount of home sales has gone up this year over last year. So in the residential market, you're still seeing pretty healthy values and sales. I believe the commercial market's a little bit lower, but this might be the one time where lack of commercial in Newberry is actually a benefit to us because we have so much residential. We don't anticipate a big impact, if any impact. And that impact would be, as Commissioner Coleman said, take effect January 1st of 2021, which would be your 2022 budget.
Does that conclude your questions, Commissioner Martin?
Given the level of certainty or uncertainty, given the level of uncertainty that we are looking at, I really just have trouble talking about $7+ million in debt. The Federal Reserve targeted interest rate, as was spoken about today, is targeted to be 2%. I think we can borrow and build these things as we go, as it's really needed. I just really think we need to look hard and long at possibly raising millage any more than it is right now, because with people out of work, I don't know when they're going to, God forbid Biden gets elected, everything's going to go bad, in my opinion. So I would rather have this discussion with a little bit more certainty, particularly on the presidency side, next go around. And the Second Avenue project, the more I'm looking at it here, I don't necessarily want the residents to really pay for this whole corridor that benefits a potential in single developer and that sort of thing. I also am not sure the plans are in the works to develop this in order for it to pay off in the economic development driver or catalyst that we're trying to achieve here. I buy the argument that money is cheap and that sort of thing, and it's awfully tempting to spend other people's money, and I don't think that I can buy into doing that full bore at this point.
Commissioner Coleman?
So if what I'm getting from Commissioner Martin, I'm going to use that word I used one time before. So you're looking at that you would capitulate to where the city hall, if we went in and said, all right, we're going to do it project by project, and let's look at going ahead and borrowing the cheapest funds I've ever seen in my career as a banker or anything, or at least to get City Hall going. Is that where you're at?
I'd have to have the, no, I would have the most appetite for the City Hall project, because, you know, if we're looking at almost maxing out our tolerance on a millage rate and we're going to expand City Hall, we're also going to have to pay for all those people in the future that are going to be actually filling that up. So there's more expenses on top of the expenses. And we can kind of sidebar. I have other thoughts on this too that aren't necessarily germane to this particular discussion. But yeah, I have the most appetite potentially for the City Hall project.
Okay, well, I think we have to clarify a few things. One, the only way I want to disagree with Commissioner Martin on the Seaboard Drive is there's no one developer there that would benefit. I think the whole city would benefit. There's potentially 2 or 3 property owners down that line that have property that is developable, but there's no like one person who is sitting in the wing saying, you know, I need the taxpayers to pay this for me so that I would benefit. I think there's multiple property owners there that could potentially, as any property owners do when government comes in and improves the road, say, okay, right? We are going to change the zoning all along First Avenue to commercial free of charge for all of these residential folks who could then, when they sell it, sell at a commercial level. Now that's clearly going to benefit them, but no one is doing that project to benefit them. They're doing it to benefit, we're doing it to benefit the whole city. So I just want to make sure that we're phrasing that right. There certainly would be property owners down Seaboard Avenue that would benefit, but I think everyone who drops their kids off at the elementary school and now has a way to get back to 26, I think everybody in the town benefits from that potential development. If there's no appetite on the commission to raise the millage whatsoever, then that pretty well takes out City Hall, because we can't use an assessment to pay for City Hall unless there's other drastic measures you want to take in terms of cutting programming. So City Hall can be funded through millage. The roads can be the assessment, but we can't do the assessment yet. We'd have to work through the process of getting to the assessment. So we're kind of having to juggle things that we have distaste for, and what do we have taste for? Commissioner Coleman?
Doing a transfer from the enterprise fund for this year, and I'm really with Commissioner Martin on this. Doing a transfer from from that fund to cover this year's expenses for the engineering, I would be for that. But that we need, it's a one-time thing right now. I guess you can tell where I don't want. Yes, yes. I don't want to slow down. I don't want to slow down City Hall. Coming up here and all. I mean, my appetite, and I think I said the road, but it's not that road. It's paving the infrastructure in the rest of these roads in town, unfortunately needs to take a back seat. We're getting by fine with that. And if I have to capitulate, City Hall is number one on my list. And if we have, a one time that we pull the transfer over to pay for this stuff this year, to not slow up progress for City Hall, I'm 100% behind that.
Okay, before I want to carry on this conversation, but the roads in the north side of town that are eligible for the grant, that CBG, does it have a matching fund? Do we have to have 25%? Because if we get the grant, that's the smallest projects, the smallest cost projects of any of these. I mean, the two big ones are Seaboard Drive and City Hall. If you get the grant, we're doing all these over here for another $500,000. Is that so? Yeah. It's kind of a pretty small piece of this overall puzzle here. So I'm hearing that a lot of folks have City Hall at the top of their list. My only comment before I open it to the floor about the transfer is now you're putting the cost of that on the urban core, right? Whereas the millage, everybody is paying for City Hall, which we've already established. We think everybody agrees with. Commissioner Farnsworth, are you trying to get my attention?
No, I wasn't. But I will say that if we do anything, I also believe the City Hall should be first.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Mayor, I know staff don't want to hear it, but we can come up with some money in 35,000's right out of the code enforcement position. That's 35,000. Now we only need 100 to pay a 30-year payment on City Hall. I'm for City Hall, but I'm not for raising the taxes at this time. I would like to look at all avenues for money before we exhaust trying to go to raising the taxes on the citizens.
Well, I guess my follow-up question to that one would be if what you're proposing is that we have to try to come up with the entire payments without raising anything, I think it's going to be tough to go in and find 188K. If what you're saying to staff is that, if what you're saying to staff is we need to compromise, we need, if it's a, go back to the payment for City Hall. Right? If we have to come up with a 20-year payment, we have to come up with 188,000 a year. Staff, you come up with, 90,000 of it, and we'll give you 90,000 in millage. So we split the baby. Is that, are you saying, I'm not raising?
Looking at it says 138,000 for the annual payment. So I proposed it, it may not go nowhere. But if you defund the position of code enforcement, there's 35,000 guaranteed, maybe more. Now we got 100,000 we need to come up with this. If we raise the millage rate only 1/10 or 1/4, that's $22, and there's no assessments.
Right, which you can't do on City
And now
Hall.
you paid the whole thing.
Well, if you raise it 1/10, you've raised 47,000. So we still got 50,000.
That's what I said.
Right.
We go to the quarter,
Right.
which is still against my.
But that's my question. Right. That's my question. Are you asking for a split the baby here? Are you asking for go into the budget and cut the whole 138K that way?
You know what maybe I'm not quite getting it.
Put your mic on, I'll turn mine off.
What I'm saying is, I'm not for raising millage rate. I just say I'm not. But the caveat is to make 138,000 to get City Hall up and going. And if that's our loan payment to get this going, if we defunded the position, I got it, and you added $250,000, we've got the money for our 138,000 annual payment. Am I right or wrong? How? It's 138,000.
117 plus 38.
If you take 35 out of code enforcement,
Right.
you're 100. If you rose 1/10, or you're saying 1/4.
1/4 is 117.
Oh, okay. I'm
Now
with
we're
you.
actually over a little bit. So
Right. Well, I mean,
just food for thought for
Right.
conversation.
We have the code enforcement position that we've discussed. There's also the two positions that we're replacing with project manager. Is if staff had to, just hypothetically, staff had to pick between putting two positions back in, right, and code enforcement, or putting one position back in and leaving code enforcement, or taking code enforcement out and having those two positions back in, what would make staff's life the easiest? Keeping code enforcement and only going back in with one of those positions, or having the two replacement positions for the project manager and giving up code enforcement? Because code enforcement is a service that we provide, that this commission could decide we're no longer going to provide that service, which answers what Commissioner Clark is looking for. So I guess I want some on-the-fly feedback here. If you had to put those three positions on the chalkboard and take away one, what would you take away?
Mr. Mayor, just before the manager answers, remind you that the two positions for the project manager are funded out of your utilities, and would have eliminating those positions would have minimal impact on your general fund, where the City Hall and payments for City Hall would be funded out of. You could eliminate those positions, and the general fund may see a savings of $10,000 because they're primarily funded out of utilities.
Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
And Mr. Mayor, on top of that, if the commission then said we'll eliminate the positions and add that to the transfer to general fund, that would be a way of accomplishing its goal. Mr. Mayor, I would say with regards to code enforcement, the commission can say we're not going to provide a code enforcement service, but that will be in conflict with the city's charter. The city's charter says that the first duty of the city manager is to see that the laws and the ordinances of the city are enforced and exercise control, direct, and supervise all activities except as otherwise provided. So first law is to see that our laws are enforced. When you look at the paradigm of government, the public safety is the first tier, and that is police, that is fire, that is building, and that is code enforcement. So when the commission asks, can we defund code enforcement? To me, we can only defund it if we ask the manager to not do his job, or we ask the manager to suck it up and do code enforcement on top of other things. I would tell you that, you know, when I started work here, this commission asked us to reduce our expenses by 15%. We did. But that took the city to as lean, to me, as the city can function. We haven't increased staffing and expenses at the rate that the city has grown in the 3 to 4 years that we've done budgeting since then. So if the commission says we're not going to fund code enforcement, we're going to figure out a way to do it, but it is a vital position to us. Our code enforcement officer does about 20 responses a month just with code enforcement. Our code enforcement officer also does special projects for the city. Things that he's worked on just this year are we had complaints from Newberry Oaks related to mine blasting. It took an analysis, and there were probably more than 40 hours involved in compiling the information about what the city's legal rights were in there and how it all fit. Code enforcement provided that. In the last 6 months, there's been a big scare about what we call neighborhood block parties. And that's resulted in shootings in some communities, and it resulted in the death of a Newberry resident in another community. Our code enforcement was tasked with where do we stand on that and how do we prevent that from coming here. Most recently, we had a neighbor, someone that lives downtown, that says, hey, those horns on CSX are obnoxious, and I want them to stop, and actually took the initiative to find out from CSX that you could establish a quiet zone. So that complaint was made to the mayor. The mayor forwarded it to me and said, hey, would you look into these quiet zones and see, could we qualify for one? What's involved in that? Again, it's a noise issue, so we give it to codes. He does an analysis and finds out that we likely can qualify, but one of the things that task he undertook was to qualify. All your railroad crossings would have to have cross arms and beacons. So someone has to go out and perform that survey. The last CDBG grant that we got for Countryway Town Center, all the hoops that you have to go through to get a CDBG grant, and actually the one on the housing as well. Our tank surveys, where are people keeping petroleum, where are there wells in the community? Codes enforcement went out and performed all those surveys. For our permits for water plants, is that we have to have a cross connection control program in place. That is in Jamie's responsibility area, and you guys just updated our ordinances to do that. But our code enforcement area is the one that ensures compliance with that. So if people don't comply with that ordinance, then we can have backflow from a contaminated backflow coming to our water system. One, we'd be out of compliance with our water system operating permit. But two, we potentially contaminate our water system because we are out of compliance and we're not requiring people to have backflow preventers. He also works the same way in the sewer system to make sure we don't have stoppages. Again, that's in our permit that we have to have that program. You guys just did the fats, oil, and grease ordinance. It's become well publicized because one of the local food trucks didn't want to comply with that ordinance. Again, it's in Jamie's responsibility area, but codes enforcement carries that work out. So it's vital to the city. If the commission says we're not going to fund it, then the manager's going to be left with a decision to make about compliance with the ordinance, with the city's charter, and how to accomplish that. It is going to affect the level of service in Newberry. And as Dallas mentioned, the two positions that we're asking for are funded in the enterprise fund. So they're not a direct correlation, but if the commission says we don't want to fund them to save that money, then the commission could say, but you've balanced an enterprise fund budget, so just transfer that money to the general fund to make the payment so that we can do these projects.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And that was going to be my solution to Dallas's objection on that one as well. I will say, when it comes to code enforcement, I remember a level of frustration up here when people said, well, why are we passing all these ordinances and we don't have anybody to enforce them? So, there always is that kind of pendulum swing of, and I think what I'm hearing now is the appetite is to kind of maybe potentially go back and deal with some of that frustration. I think that if we do that, it's a temporary fix. I think it's 1 year, 2 years, and we're right back to Mr. Manager. You got to find somebody to go make these people clean stuff up and enforce these ordinances. Let's go back to Commissioner Coleman's concept here, because I think that it is worth discussing. And I think it ties in Commissioner Coleman's proposal with Commissioner Martin's comment of we're all living in an uncertain time right now. So if we don't want to raise millage, if we don't want to, if we're not ready to commit ourselves, we could do the transfer as a one-time transfer to move the ball on all of these so that we have a better understanding of them in next budget season, right? We'd be able to pursue the assessment. We'd have concrete details and information about the assessment. We would know probably whether we're going to get the grant or not. Again, I think that one's a pretty sure deal. And we would start the process for City Hall. Commissioner Coleman, did you want to follow up on that? Go ahead.
First, thanks, Dallas. I was wondering what the mills were. There they are, for just the City Hall. But no, if we're going to break it out in the three, though, we need to, and I'm with both of them. We can't raise no taxes right now. There's so much uncertainty. Let's get through this presidential cycle, but let's don't slow it down. And I don't know, our city manager will know if this is kicking the can down the road if we went that way to, and I want his input on this. If we did pull money out of the enterprise, and I never thought I'd ever say that. Remember when can't believe that's how the city's been doing it. But with this, it's about infrastructure for the city, City Hall. But I do want Mike's input on that. If we pulled from the enterprise fund and got whatever engineering, whatever questions we need to ask to keep the can not being kicked down the road. That's where I'm at right now.
Mr. Mayor, as I've indicated before, on the enterprise fund side, we as a government entity ask our utility ratepayers to contribute less to the running of general fund than most cities. Both with the water tax, we don't charge a water tax, most cities do. Our general fund transfers 5%, most are 8% and more. So we're there. We discuss often with the commission, though, that the utility payers are a smaller subset of our overall citizens. And so they're burdened more by fees associated to the utilities. The way to burden our average homeowner the least is through ad valorem and property taxes. So I'll leave that there because I understand the commission's appetite for not doing that, but the least painful way for the average residential property owner is through property tax, millage rate.
And a quarter mil would get $117,000, which is about half of what you predict we would spend in this first year, but it would keep everything moving.
Correct.
3/4 mil, each one gets us just a little bit closer. That $500,000 is where we would need to be to keep all of these projects moving so that you could pull the trigger on any one of them next year. I don't remember in recent memory us ever transferring just a set amount and saying we're pulling this out of this fund to pay for these things. And I do see that different. I see that as a different concept. I think the manager made a good point. When we struggled with the transfer, it's because it was 12% one year, 9% another year. And it was how we always shored up a deficit budget. So we always knew it was there. And if we blew one budget, well, we just pulled money over and it was kind of willy-nilly. And now I do react much more to that than a set percentage, which has been lower. I also recognize the fact that taxes are inherently unfair. You and I have paid for our entire lives for mosquito control, and we've never once gotten it. Now we've corrected that by making an assessment a couple of years back. But for my entire life, I've paid for mosquito because I was always taken out of ad valorem. So I paid for a service I never got. So did you. So did you. So did Monty. You paid for it for a few years. as well. Right? So we all pay for things, yeah, that we don't get. So, I'm not sure how that adds to the thinking, but at this point, if you did pull out $230,000 out of that fund to pay for this, to keep all these projects going, I hate to sound as vague as this, but property taxes are vague, but that probably in the wash is less than an 8% transfer on a yearly basis over the last 5 years would have been. And that would be a way to, no one has to feel an increase of any pain this year with the uncertainty. The property taxes are the taxpayers and Newberry utility payers have already paid into those funds. So continuing thoughts. And again, guys, we're not making a decision tonight. We won't make a decision until the staff presents the budget at an agendaed meeting. But we have to have a balanced budget by the end of September. Otherwise, we have apocalyptic situations here in Newberry that Dallas will tell you. Yeah. Commissioner Clark?
I'm just the new guy, but I'm just saying that we got a balanced budget. I personally, I'm in for it, but if we need to kick it down the road, I'm willing to kick it for a year. Because we got a fluid situation in this country with everything that's going on, and I just don't want to raise no taxes. So if there's money there to be seen, and I can get a warm and fuzzy with it and see where it comes from, one of the funds, I'd like to get a little more education and be willing to sit and talk with the manager on any of that and see where the money comes from. But as far as the millage rate, if we're not going to do it, then no.
What's your knee-jerk reaction to pulling the equivalent of the $500,000 out of the fund over? That way you're not raising the mills, you're not doing the assessment. I know you need a little bit more conversation, but
I do.
but that's a conversation you're willing to have.
Yes,
that's my question.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anyone else willing to have that conversation? Commissioner Farnsworth or Norfleet, I don't know if you guys are trying to get my attention.
Yeah, I am Commissioner Norfleet. Telephone.
That's all right. We're watching that pretty sunset behind you.
One thing I had a question about was we've kind of got some on the road work and stuff. I think Dallas or Mike had mentioned about extra money having to go towards it for depreciation so it can pay for improvements down the road. Is there anything set aside for that on City Hall and kind of what it's going to cost to operate a new City Hall?
I think I'm muted. Yeah, we've set up depreciations on just about everything. Do we have one on City Hall? Is there any money sitting there? That's the last. So we've got all of our trucks and everything ready to go, but City Hall not yet. You want to answer the question, Mr. Mayor?
But, Mr. Mayor, it's just part of governmental accounting, as I understand it. Enterprise accounting, we are depreciation funding is part of smart enterprise financing. I'm not so sure that the governmental accounting that we use on the on general fund requires a depreciation payment. Is that correct, Dallas? So for certain things like fleet, we do have VERF and depreciation funds, but I don't think we have anything like that set up for facilities. It's our savings account, general fund reserves above and beyond the emergency reserve that we spent a lot of time talking. That is our depreciation fund.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. We are required to calculate what your depreciation should be every year in your governmental funds, but it's not something that we expense and put aside like you're required to do in your utility funds.
And I want to address Commissioner Norfleet. Let me finish. So are you done before I move on?
Yeah, I was done. I think the only other part of that was if there was kind of an idea what it was going to cost to operate a new City Hall building on a yearly basis that would be built into the budget annually after it was built.
Mr. Mayor, having performed that analysis now, I would say that aside from salaries, that our operational costs, if we triple our square footage, likely we would see our energy cost and things follow that same trend. New construction, of course, would be more efficient, so we'd see some economies there, but I would expect a proportional increase in the true operating costs for the building. From a staffing perspective, to Commissioner Martin's point, if we're adding staff, we're going to increase cost. Generally, we see staff additions as a result of a growing population, and we're trying to maintain a level of service. And if one day it took 3 employees to service 3,000 citizens, then when we get to 6,000 citizens, we may think that it's going to take 5 or 6 employees to do that. Hopefully, the addition to the tax roll will cover the majority of those expenses. So pure operating costs, we think they'll be proportional on a square foot basis, and personnel costs are gonna increase, but we think that's going to be proportionate to the relative increase in revenues associated with increasing population.
Commissioner Norfleet, is that the one spot in your yard you get really good signal? I know where that spot is in my yard too.
That is.
I feel really bad for Commissioner Clark. Swear in last week and you're looking at a conversation of, can we borrow all this money? So yeah, it's a lot of burden to drop on you like this. And I understand the inclination to say we need to kick it a year, right? And we may need to kick it a year. I get that. I would only say that all of these projects have already been kicked, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. I mean, we've been talking about City Hall renovation since before Mr. New was new to Newberry. So, these are things that, this is the closest we've gotten to action on these items. These roads over here in Newberry have been unpaved our entire lives, and those residents have been asking, when are they going to be paved, So it's a COVID world. It's a strange world. I get saying now may not be the time. But I do think that there are incentives and advantages to having this conversation right now. And there may be advantages to moving forward right now. So before we vote on the budget once we vote on the budget, we're locked into whatever we say, and if we don't give ourselves any wiggle room to move forward on any of these, then we have kicked the can till the next year. So that's why we're having this in-depth conversation tonight, and we're throwing all these ideas out here and seeing if any of them will stick. I don't want to keep us here past the point of us making logical sense because we're getting tired. But if anyone else has any other, I think that was great out of the box thinking. We've never considered a one-time transfer for specific costs to do that. That just hasn't been thrown around. Well done, Commissioner Coleman, right? Commissioner Martin saying, we need that connector road between 15th and Newberry Road. That's how we got to this variation of this concept. So these workshops really are good at moving us towards better ideas. But we can also beat it to death. So it's a workshop. We're not going to take any action tonight. If we feel like we've got all of the conversation that's worthwhile, we'll all go off and we'll sleep on all of these things. We'll continue the conversation and we'll come back. We have Miss Peggy here. If she wants to tell us how you're reacting to this conversation, what you think. We would love to hear from the public, and we can take a break and see if there's anyone listening that wants to chime in as well. Miss Peggy, would you mind coming up, and you got anything you want to say to us? Any thoughts you have? We appreciate it. Come on up. Take your time. Take your time. Do you want a shoulder? You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Peggy Lloyd, citizen. I think all three of these are great. I think the City Hall is important. And I think the paving of the roads are important because I don't live on an unpaved road. If I lived in the city and paid the same city taxes and got the same services, but I didn't really get the same services, I know some of those people over there maybe have been stewing over this for a long time. I think they're very patient, but I think it ought not to be tossed out just because it's the easiest one to toss out, because it's important to those people. And it seemed like it's kind of clustered over in one corner of that section. And I've been on some of those roads and they're pretty awful. Even if they're graded a lot, they're pretty awful. So.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. Okay, so I think we may be wrapping it up. Let's go check on the public comments. Is there anyone in the waiting room? No one in the waiting room. Okay, so unless there's any commissioner that feels like there's some piece of this left for us to talk about, it seems like what would be best. I usually try to end these by giving staff some direction, but it seems like we're going in lots of different directions right now. So I think we're gonna need to do a little bit of work, have some sidebars. You guys need to talk to the manager. We'll talk to each other, and we'll see if there's something where we can get to a proposal we think we can get behind. And again, just to summarize, what I'm hearing from the majority of the commission is that we definitely want to move forward with City Hall, but we're uncomfortable with millage, which is the primary way we would pay for that. The roads over here, we've heard from the public and some commissioners, we want to move forward on those. Perhaps this connector road is something that we don't move forward on right now. And so those are the kinds of things we have to consider. The assessment cannot come into play until the next year. So anything we want to do this year, what we have to sleep on is either an increase in millage to generate a couple $100,000 to move these 3 projects forward, or consider making the one-time transfer of a set amount with direction to the staff that money is to be spent on further exploration of these 3 projects and data collection so that we can make a better, more informed decision about how we're moving forward. Commissioner Clark.
Mr. Mayor, is the road project have to have a study, or is it ready to be paid?
Mr. Mayor, the project itself, if we do the unpaved roads in the downtown area, it doesn't require a study. It requires minimal engineering. It won't be a great big engineering study. But if we use an assessment to pay it, that will definitely kick us into a fairly complex analysis by a specialist doing that. The project, the connector road, would be very complex engineering type work and would obviously require a design professional to take on that road, develop, a set of construction plans so that we can move that project forward.
So the second part of that would be, so I got that part, but I'm for the City Hall. If we can just figure out some money, but if we're gonna need money to also do the engineering part of these roads, and we do get this $700,000 grant or whatever we're getting, and we ain't got to borrow but $400,000 more on top of what we're already getting for City Hall, we might as well wrap these 2 projects together. That's kind of, but Seaboard to me adding 4 million or whatever it is, 3 point something, which is almost doubling I would not be, that'd be third on the priority list for me.
Yeah, and when we originally talked about Seaboard, it was projected in the 1.5, right? And then when we look a little bit deeper, we get into the 3.5, right? So when we had originally talked about combining all of these, we were in the 5.8 to 6 range, right? So that project has definitely ballooned. So there may be an opportunity to try to work to get it back into that 1.5 million range. I think the city manager is about to address this. Cobbling the roads over here to City Hall might be more problematic than keeping them separate, because City Hall is going to be millage. Those roads over there are going to be grants primarily. So we can try to figure out to pay for them all through the loan and then get the grant back, and we pay the grant down. Is that what you're about to say, Mr. Manager?
Mr. Mayor, I was going to provide more of a timetable and a couple details about the grant. We believe that we would submit a grant application in April of next year. And there is not a match requirement. It's a $700,000 grant. We don't get to apply 100% of that to the actual asphalt. There's a administrator's fee that's part of that. So we'll pay a consultant to manage that grant for us. So we end up with in the 580 or 600,000 range that goes straight to it. We get bonus points because it's a competitive evaluation. We get bonus points for having a shovel-ready project, ready to go to bid. We also get bonus points if the commission is willing to put forward $50,000 in matching funds. And so those are the general criteria that would be associated with that program. We've put together, this would be more akin to the road resurfacing projects that you've seen us do for the last 4 or 5 years in terms of engineering scope. So it would be a few details and a master plan with a written scope versus pages and pages of very in-depth construction plans, probably minimal utility work associated with it. It's mostly, we're going to put in a little drainage area so that the roads, that's what kills our roads is lack of drainage facilities. We'll put in shallow swells, 6 or 8 inches deep and a 20-foot wide driving surface, and that's it. It's a fairly simple road concept.
I guess my only last comment about the millage is similar to the vein of the policies we've adopted when it comes to utility prices and those kinds of things. It is tough to not raise a cost of something for 5-10 years and then recognize, well, that made that previous commission look pretty good. They kept kicking that can down the road, but now we've got to raise the rates by 10, 12, 13, 14%, right? So I would say, I would ask you guys to consider the same thing when it comes to millage. We're sitting at 5.99. If there's any scenario in your head where we need millage rate to pay for these projects, it's much easier to go to 6.1 this year, 6.2 this year, and then 6.3 or 6.4 the following year than to leave it at 5.9 and then need to go up to 6.4, 6.5 and have that big jump. I think people are always a little bit, it's easier on me, from my personal budget, if I can incrementally absorb costs. So again, just one more variation to consider. And if there's no more closing thoughts or comments from the dais, Commissioner Martin.
If I'm looking at the CIP, the total for 21-22 is 4.3 million. The following year is 12 million. 23-24 is 17.2 million. And then it drops off significantly down to 775,000. I only say that to, now all that doesn't necessarily come out of millage fundings and things like that, but I would implore my fellow commissioners to just think about wants versus needs. I appreciate all the other comments moving forward, but there's some big ticket items coming down the pipe very soon. And in 3 years, we can go from 6 mills to 8-9 mills, and then we're part of the problem that we fight against every day. I think there's just when you go home to digest this, just pick up this other sheet, because if we're talking about borrowing this kind of money, there's a whole lot of this that could get paid for with the money that we're talking about doing some of these other things. And I'm cautious. Obviously, I'm very cautious.
One last thing, Mr. Mayor. And it's about the money. So I would say in this year's, if we're talking about needing some money, I think Mr. New mentioned that we do have the 50,000 that 2 weeks ago you didn't have for a contingency fund that you could use. And there's about 15,000 extra on top of the budget that we're in the good. So now we're at 65,000 that we could possibly use without ever getting outside of borrowing or going anywhere else. So food for thought.
You know, it occurs to me that we've celebrated the past 5 years having the $50,000 contingency fund that we haven't touched. So there's $250,000 in our reserves above, a little bit over $200,000 above what we need to have the 3 months, right? What happened to it? Right, but I'm saying the reserves are there, right? When we just celebrated, we have 3 months of reserves and we have excess over the 3 months because, and largely, not entirely, but that's because of the contingency fund. So this commission could decide to take what we need to move these projects forward so that we can continue collecting data just by collecting the last few years of contingency fund and saying we're going to use that at this point, right? And we still would have enough money in reserves to protect the city for 3 months of bills, right? And that you wouldn't have to raise anything. I'm always appreciative that this commission focuses on needs, not wants. That's why we're talking about infrastructure right here tonight. We spent 2 hours talking about needs. We need City Hall. We need road infrastructure. And that's why we have focused solely on needs. I don't see any of these things as wants. All of these things are infrastructure items that project into 20, 30 years from now. So that's another, even without going to the utility, everyone has paid into the contingency fund. So there's 200,000 in the last 4 years, 250,000 in the last 5 years. We can say, city manager, take the last 5 years of contingency funds and use that to move these projects forward. Because even if you decide not to follow through on one, eventually we're going to pave these roads. Eventually we're going to have a city hall. It's a question of when, not if. Right? You're going to have to do this eventually. So all of the work that we do now in terms of engineering, plan, surveying would ostensibly still be applicable into the future, even if you don't move on it immediately. So that would be another way of phrasing it and framing it that might make it more palatable to move forward. Any other final? Commissioner Coleman.
How tough is it there's plenty of money in the enterprise. If we were looking at 250 to 300,000 for engineering for this, right? We're good there if we were to pull money out of enterprise. And I'm looking at you and I should be looking at Dallas.
Well, I think Dallas should chime in on this. I would say that I'm more comfortable if we pull money out of rates, which is revenues for this year, than pulling it out of our utility savings. What we have in utility savings, we're gonna need. We got projects equally as sophisticated and complex for the commission to look at coming up in the near future. We got a water plant expansion, which is not such a big cost. We got a wastewater plant expansion that will be a big cost. We have a good savings account to start with that. We have a good plan for how we finance that.
And you still got AMI.
And yeah, an AMI is going to come in at about $1 million. So we're actually doing pretty good on AMI. So staff would say that if there's money to be generated out of rates, like transfer, because we just pass that through on everybody's monthly bill, then I would say fine, because we're already so conservative. But I would not suggest to the commission, wouldn't advocate the commission to go get money out of our savings accounts for any of our enterprise funds. We're going to need it.
That's what I want to know.
Other commission closing thoughts? Okay. Any live public closing thoughts? We appreciate it. All right, Dallas, would you put our phone number up? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of a robust conversation about the future of Newberry, the visioning of Newberry, what projects we want to move forward, and how we want to move those forward. If you've been watching, and we hope you are, we hope you have some comments to make to the commission. In order to do so, all you need to do is dial the phone number that's on your screen. That's going to get you into the meeting. Once you're in the meeting, simply click that little hand symbol at the bottom of your screen. That'll let us know that you want to make a comment to the commission, and we'll make sure you have the opportunity to do so. Just one last reminder, our folks watching on YouTube are about 30 seconds behind us, which is about to expire now, so you should be caught up with us. We'll give you a few more seconds, and we'll see if anyone is in the waiting room. Okay, seeing no public comment and no final thoughts from the commission or staff. Oh, Mr. Manager, you have a final thought.
One general comment to the commission and the public watching, our city hall offices will be closed next Monday in recognition of Labor Day.
And I'll chat with you guys. It sounds to me like we need another meeting to give staff more specific direction so that they can present an actual budget to you in a timely manner. So if we can't come to some ready agreement, we'll try to schedule another budget workshop for next week where we can come and finalize our thoughts here and give staff the direction that they need. Don't forget, at our next meeting, we need to appoint someone to the North Florida Regional Planning Council. Commissioner Coleman has served on that. Commissioner Martin has served on that. I've served on that. You know, so it's a great fried chicken dinner. Miss Judy goes up there on a regular basis, so she can fill you in. We've all had a lot of experience with them. It's a great way to make connections. Every city in North Central Florida sends a representative there, so you really do get to know everybody. Well, I mean, that's, you know, yeah. Once a year, you serve your year, and then there'll be a new guy up here we pass the buck to. All right, hearing no final comments,